Good morning.
Morning.
We're on the right one. Cool. So quick aside about the card thing first is you can actually get a mod that will take one of the cards, melt it down in acetone and put it inside a ring. So this is my backup key because I'm terrible at remembering to take my wallet places. I pay with my phone, so my wallet never comes with me. But this is my backup plan, and I've only broken my phone once.
And you don't charge that or anything, do you?
No, because it's just an RFID card, but in a circle instead of a flat base. That's been,
And do you need to just put that in a little...
Yeah, so you just put your hand on the side of the door, then put your hand in the middle, and it works just like a card, except I can't forget it anymore.
Expensive? $300 or $400, I think.
$180 I paid for it. There was a discount in the member thing.
You can choose colour and sizes.
It took about 6 weeks to arrive because they make it more. So quick background for me. I've done a bunch of different technical and IT jobs. I've done on different continents. I love technical stuff. I love details. The Model 3 is a really interesting car. But as we heard before, you don't need to be technical to make the thing work. It's a very, very easy car to live with, and all of the nerdery is completely optional. Very fun, but completely optional. It's also direct from my mum and my sister, both non-technical people. They were surprised within a couple of minutes how easy it was to drive without needing to understand the screen. Just one pedal go, indicators, steering wheel. Lovely. However, when it comes to charging in EVs, there's a small amount of technical information that is worth knowing. And I'm going to keep it to the barest minimum. If you have heard any of this before, like you do know this stuff, like ex-auto electrician, please bear with us because there'll be people here that haven't learned that stuff. There will be a small amount of the technical side. I've kept it down to the barest minimum that I can see as being useful to you in a new, EV-based world. So we'll go over the biggest sticking point: power versus capacity, kilowatts versus kilowatt hours. Not in great detail, just bare minimum. AC versus DC charging, again, bare minimum detail. Battery chemistry, that's only a quick one. I'll let you tune out for that if you don't really care. Charging equipment, which is, as we heard, unless you're going on long trips, not too big a deal if you are going on long trips. Pretty easy to sort through. Charging etiquette, so around that question of how long you're going to be and all that. Some other tips and tricks and troubleshooting, little stuff you'll bump into. One of them you've already heard, which is the reset button on the big chargers. And of course, question time. So the basic thing we really need to learn is the watt and the fact that it is a measure of power. It's like horsepower. It's the amount of power whizzing through a big fat copper cable in this car right now. You don't put horsepower into your fuel tank, you put an amount of fuel into your fuel tank. The watt is like horsepower. And we use the kilowatt, which is just 1,000 watts. A kilowatt is about 1.3-ish horsepower. So that's why we use it as a unit. It's a good number, it's workable, it's relatable, and we measure combustion engines in kilowatts at the moment anyway. Cool. So I've got an example here of Model 3 wheel drive makes around 210 kilowatts, which is about 280-ish horsepower, if you like the old money, just as a reference point. And it works both ways. So when the car is moving, you are taking power out of the battery, putting it to the road through the wheels. When you're charging, you're putting power back in. That's the same rate. They're the same kilowatts. It's the same, cable you're whizzing in and out of. So that figure stays true. So power based in kilowatts. But we need a little bit of maths to help make sense of this. Charging a battery. I'm going to use a notional battery of 10 kilowatt hours. It's about the right size for a home storage battery if any of you have them. This is all the maths we've got. It's not going to be too tricksy, but a 10 kilowatt hour battery, that means?
Noting that there's 74 in that car, for example, it's 74 kilowatt hours, just to give you a concept of scale.
Yeah, so we'll do an example in a minute based on the current rear wheel drive one.
Yeah.
Because it's good to know, but to turn into a capacity from power, like you don't put horsepower into your fuel tank in a combustion engine. What we need to do to turn kilowatts into power, because it's a bit of a different unit, is we add the component of time. So here we have 10 kilowatt hours as an example battery. What that means is you can pull 10 kilowatts out of it for 1 hour, or you can pull 1 kilowatt out of it for 10 hours. The faster you pull power out of it, the shorter it lasts. And that math scales up and down quite nicely. So 10 kilowatt hour battery pulling out 5 kilowatts, it's dead in 2. 10 kilowatt hour battery pulling out 2 kilowatts, any takers. 5 hours. That's it.
If you have a coffee order, just put your hand up.
A good opportunity for a coffee while we're doing the technical stuff. A bit of caffeine never hurts.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. So the current rear wheel drive battery's around 60 kilowatt hours. That example before of pulling power out of a battery, just like with power, it's exactly the same backwards for capacity. There's some more complexity around it. We'll skip over that. If you're not technical, you don't need to know. If you are, come and ask. We'll go through all the details. But using the example of the 60 kilowatt hour battery in the rear wheel drive, we can use these numbers to work out what our charging times are going to be roughly. So if you're plugging into a power point at home, you're going to get a much lower power rate than if you plug into a big three-phase at a factory or a showground. And that's even less again than a fast charger. But just for some numbers, if you're plugged into a regular 10 amp socket at home, out of the box, that charger will give you about 2 kilowatts. Maths says that takes about 30 hours to give you a full charge. It seems like a long time. You won't use the full battery all the time, and most of this will be happening at night while you're in bed. So 12 hours of charging a day is actually surprisingly realistic for people. And 200 to 300 kilometres worth of fuel in your tank overnight in a combustion engine would be pretty damn spiffy actually if it just happened by magic.
12 hours plugging in just here should get you around half a battery on a standard Model 3. Is that what you're saying?
Roughly, yeah.
Yeah. So overnight, from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m, you've got half a tank.
Correct.
Plugging in old school.
And that's assuming you're actually consuming half a tank in a day.
Yeah, right.
And
So if you got stuck and you just pulled up anywhere you like, as long as there's electricity there, you'd be okay to get a half a charge overnight.
spot on. And
Or get to the next town that's got a supercharger.
Exactly right.
Go on a road trip or something, yeah.
Exactly right. Yep.
so just to flash out the numbers, if you're charging on a 3-phase plug, you'll be around 10 or 11 kilowatts. That works out to about 6 hours. So now we're getting pretty quick off a standard plug in the wall that you probably don't have at home. Some homes can get, otherwise that's the sort of thing you might find.
That's three phase.
Yep, so, and we'll do a show and tell on the plugs so you can see which ones you may want if you're travelling more. And if you're using a fast charger, now there is more complexity around this. We'll cover this one because it is important a bit later. But you can see here a fast charger. Half an hour is not a big undertaking compared to 30 hours on a 10 amp socket. So, yeah, well, there's a little bit more around that in the practical side. This is just the theory. This is just understanding the bare minimum maths and the difference between power and capacity. That's it. That's the battle one. If you can keep this in your head, if you're not a technical person, there's nothing more that you need to know to get you by with these.
So how does that cross-reference, say, to the charging network? Like,
it's the Tesla supercharger, that bottom one. What's the council one, which is that Type 2 thing? You know, what charges would typically would be
You get back, you'll be able to sort of light them up.
So the chargers, when they put them in, the charger and what's feeding it will have some sort of limitation. So those fast chargers can go anywhere from 22 kilowatts up to over 300, which most cars can't even accept charge that fast. But if you have a destination charger, like the wall ones that we've got the example of here, they're usually either 7 or 11 kilowatts, depending on their power source. If you are at any other charger, you basically need to check on PlugShare or on a website what their charging rate is.
From minute to minute, it can change too. On the, I know the superchargers in the valley, particularly, can be quite slow at times. They'll drop down to 20 kilowatts.
Is
or
it
so.
because the valley struggles with power?
Yeah, so those superchargers are talking to the building management system and know how much power
Yes.
their grid connection is good for,
Yeah.
and how much the air conditioning is using, and all the other stuff in that facility.
So they're
And
clever
and
enough not
working
to trip
the
the
gap.
breaker.
I've got a couple of restaurants, and bars in the valley, and they call it the afternoon glow. So in the afternoon, sometimes like the power in the bar just sort of just dims a bit. And you're like, whoa!
Yeah,
But there's
and
so many
you
bars.
definitely experience that at the
When every bar turns on everything at 6 p.m,
Yeah.
it just struggles.
And then, like, every-
And what about the fact that you said, 60 kilowatt takes about 30 hours, it's 2
Kilowatt hours.
kilowatt amps. But I've heard that there's actually quite a bit of a loss between, let's say, 7-inch cable, while actually you pull off the grid, it goes in your car that you need.
There's not a lot
Or
of
is
the
it just
cable.
30?
There's not a lot of loss over the cable. Most of the loss you get is actually in the car being on and the losses in the charging from
Okay.
both the charger and the battery pack.
Yeah.
And that's why I said that it's not complete, the whole picture, but once you get a feel for 30 hours versus 6 hours versus half, that's plenty. If you want to care more about some of the finer details, hit me up afterwards, because there are some things you may want to think about when you're charging off a 10 amp plug.
Yeah.
The losses do actually start to matter a bit more there. But for most people topping up overnight, you can sort of gloss over it. It's not a big impact. Is that enough of an answer?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, because I got one of the Tesla chargers, but if you actually work with that 2 kilowatt plug-in thing in a small power point, that you think, oh well, look, this month I have charged say 200 kilowatt, and on your power bill, you see the power bill, you see I got 250 kilowatt.
Yeah, good point. So for anyone who,
80% is sort of the typical loss
Okay.
from the power point to actual energy stored in the battery.
Yeah.
Compared
You're
to
splitting
an
hairs there, aren't you?
Yeah, 8%
Cemetery.
is a world better than the 60% that a petrol car loses.
Oh, of course, I'm just,
No, I'm just giving some context. That's
Yeah.
the joy of and you can tell that it's pretty efficient because it's not getting hot, it's not making noise. When it's doing it, when you use a 250 kilowatt supercharger, it's doing a lot of work in a short period of time, and that is a bit less efficient as well. And you'll hear the car working, trying to cool that excess wasted heat out of the car. But generally, it's a rounding error that's
So
certainly there's always room for improvement. But
so if you're non-Tesla supercharger and you're lowish and you want to get to 50%, and I know they can vary, but how long would that take? Because I think it might come to the etiquette. If I don't know what that means and I plug it in and go, okay, it's going to do it in 5 hours, I'll come back in 5 hours, but it's done in 2 hours. So
you can't tell in advance necessarily, because if it's a 50 kilowatt charger and it's been turned down because the grid doesn't have capacity, you'll plug in, it'll come up on your screen and say it tops out at 30.
it will give an estimate, and it could change if the charger, if you got there at 4 and at the beginning of peak hour and it started slowing down, there's wiggle room. But
And your phone will
if
notify
you
you.
look at the charger app or on the car and you slide that limit slider, the point where it will stop charging and consider itself full. If you move that, you'll see the estimated time change live within a couple of seconds.
And we'll have a look at that on the interior video.
So yes, I'll show you how it works. But if you slide that down to 50%, because that's where you would want to be, to get your coffee and come back to the car, you can slide it down to 50 and have a look and say, oh, it says it'll be about 15 minutes. I've got 15 minutes. And you can slide it back up to 90 so that if you're 20 minutes, you're not wasting those 5 minutes not charging. But yeah.
So really basically, if you're going for a drive somewhere and you stop for a coffee, so just put it on charge wherever you go.
basically, at the end of the day.
Yeah.
ABC.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
It's ABC.
I've been going to Lismore volunteering since the floods, so I think that's about 3.5 hour drive, give or take, something like that. So I'm Brisbane, so I just stop in at Goldie,
Yeah.
and I go to the toilet, have a coffee, I get back to 100%, 10 minutes.
Yeah.
So I don't know what I'm going to be doing in Lismore, so I just want to have fun. But there's no power out there. No, I just fill it up and go. I just don't be an idiot and charge it for 3 hours and take the spot, because I'm going to get charged $1 a minute overcharge, you know?
With regards to topping it up, my sister owns a Tesla and she lives in London. She said never ever charge it to 100%. Or was that
Correct.
about 95?
No, that depends on battery chemistries. We will go over that as well. Also a good question.
Covering that.
And ask again if I haven't covered it to your satisfaction in the later bit.
Thank you.
So now the last little technical bit is not around the power and capacity, it's around understanding the types of charging. Now, as much as I love to tell you about the difference between AC and DC and all the other cool bits about it, it doesn't make a big difference to you. The important part to know is that batteries are DC, power grid is AC. Don't need to know what they are necessarily if you don't care, but they're different. And so the important part of AC charging is that you need to turn it into DC. That's what the battery is, that's what it will accept, that's what it gives out, that's all it knows. And so no matter what you're doing, if you're charging off the grid, you have to change it into what the battery expects. When you plug into an AC power source, like a 10 amp plug at home, a 3-phase, whatever, there's an onboard charger in the car. It does the conversion for you. It's good for up to 11 kilowatts. That's why you hit that limit with the 3-phase. And that's a good mix of, if it was any bigger, it would be heavier, the car would be more expensive and it would rarely be used. If it was smaller, you're not really charging at the rate that you may wish to. 11 kilowatts is the magic number. That's what the car with the onboard charger can charge your battery at. So the lowest you can go down to is 1.2 kilowatts, give or take. If for whatever reason you're tripping a breaker, you can sort of turn it down. Hopefully that never happens to you. 11's your peak because that's all it can do. And the fastest you can get without 3-phase is 7.2, just for any of you that care about that note. Now the difference when they talk about fast chargers or DC fast chargers, ultra fast chargers, superchargers, it's exactly the same. You're charging off the grid from AC power, you are turning it into DC to put into the battery. The only thing that changes is that the charger is external to the car. So because it doesn't have to move and you don't have to pay for it, they can make it bloody enormous. So some of them are this tall and this thick.
The ones out the front here are as tall as any of us and that thick and that deep.
Yeah, if I open that up, I could probably fit inside the bloody thing. So that's why it can charge faster. It's the same thing. It's just turning grid power into DC, but instead of you having that whole charger built into your car for convenience, it's there bolted into the concrete. And the end result is just turning grid AC power into DC for the battery. When they say DC fast charger, it's really just meaning that that conversion happens for you rather than your car doing the job. The end result doesn't really change the system quicker, much quicker, because it's easier to keep cool, it's all of the good stuff. And you will find them go as low as 22 kilowatts. Currently we have them going up to 350 for a couple of the new models. Who knows how fast they'll get. This will probably increase over time. My car can't charge at anywhere near 350 kilowatts. But there will be cars coming out that can charge much quicker. The sky's the limit because you don't have to carry it around. I'll just make a bigger and bigger box and feed it with bigger and bigger wires. Like that's an entire factory's worth of power at that point. Like a generous factory.
So the Model 3 at the moment is 150 max?
Depends on the battery. So the different battery packs, the bigger the battery pack is and the more power the car puts out, the more powerful they have to make the battery, the quicker you can put it back in. So mine's the least powerful, it's the base model, because it's set up to, it's a battery that you can't pull as much power out of. If you put my battery pack into a performance, this couldn't run at its rated power. The battery would hold it back. That's why I can't charge as fast. I can't pull out power as fast, so I can't put it in as fast.
So the maximum for your car then? So DC charger?
About 160 kilowatts.
And the
Give or
LR
take.
or the performance?
They'll cap out at 250.
250.
That's the
On
current.
the right charger.
Yeah, on a charger that's capable of it.
Yeah.
Like whoever's got the lowest limit, that's what you do. Weakest link in the chain sort of stuff. And that leads into a nice explanation of the chargers. That's our Type 2 charger. This is your AC charger. This is, the power is here, and these two are used so that the charger in the car can chat and make sure they're happy. You'll see plenty of those. These go to the charger on board in your car. So it's just power from the grid, 240 volts, to that charger to do its thing. I don't know where it is. I don't need to. It just works. When you plug into a big DC fast charger, this is the same shape. These are the same little connectors that it uses for the car and the charger to negotiate how they're going to do things. But this little bit here, this is an add-on. This is why they call it CCS, or Combined Charging System. Because they're taking a plug that you've already got and just adding two gigantic pins that go straight to your battery. So you plug into the fast charger. It doesn't want to be limited by your onboard rubbish. It wants direct access to the battery. That's it. So when you see on the side of the car, you've got the plug looking, just like these ones, with the two big pins under it that when you plug in, they never seem to be used. They're only there for DC fast charging. Any questions around that? Does that make enough sense for those connectors? Cool.
One thing I'll point out is that a supercharger, like the superchargers at the Valley and some of the older superchargers, have both of these cables on them.
I got to swap that.
And you need to use the bigger one for your Model 3. The smaller one only works in older Model S, and you always use the big one as a supercharger. It won't fit.
Yeah, not quite. Like
But I've
you might
certainly
think
seen
it
people
will.
confused about it. Yeah.
It looks close enough to really get you.
Yeah.
All right, so if anyone wants to tune out their brain because they don't care enough about the battery chemistry stuff, quick slide, couple of minutes. But for the people who do want to know just the minimum, the current rear-wheel drive has what's called an LFP battery. Lithium iron phosphate, Fe, is the chemical symbol for iron, hence why it's not I. Lithium iron phosphate is in a lot of the cheaper cars. Tesla has some quite good ones in the rear-wheel drive. It is a cheaper battery. It is quite a safe battery. It doesn't use anything fancy outside of lithium, but it has less capacity. It's a little bit heavier. It's a little bit bigger for the same amount of capacity. In the rear-wheel drive, that's fine though. We've got a smaller battery pack. That's what we're paying for, and it's much cheaper. That works for me. I don't need the extra range. Paying 10 grand less for a different battery chemistry, I'm pretty happy with.
Zero cobalt too. If anyone asks you about, what about the cobalt mines? An LFP battery has zero cobalt.
And it's a very good point, because for the all-wheel drive and the performance to have that extra range and that extra power, LFPs don't cut it. So they use what is called an NMC or an NCA, two very similar battery chemistries. They're still lithium based. So NMC actually means lithium, nickel, manganese, cobalt. That's why the batteries are, they work much better, because they have these rare minerals that actually do a slightly better job. It's not a huge difference, but it matters. And that cobalt question does come up around some of the safety considerations around the mines. NCA is just lithium, nickel, cobalt, aluminium. They replace manganese with the aluminium. It's a little bit cheaper, a little bit lighter, very similar battery chemistries. They're more expensive. Nickel is expensive, cobalt is expensive. But in the same size battery pack, you go from 60 kilowatt hours up to 82 kilowatt hours. That's why they use it. That's why it's in the Porsche Taycan. It's a very high performance battery, but it's more expensive, and we get to pick. So I picked the LFP. Luke's got, of course, the fancy one I'd love to drive, but didn't want to pay for.
And to capacity, it's more capacity and more power. So you talked about capacity and power before. It has more of both.
So you can pull more power out of it to make a higher performing car. Also, why it charges quicker, because you can really jam it back in a lot faster than the LFP.
So the long range is coming in, which one of those?
Bottom one. So the all-wheel drive is the long range here. We don't get.
So it's a combination, isn't it?
So
combination battery. And nickel magnet.
no, it's one or the other. Sorry, I wasn't quite clear about that. Yeah, good question. So yeah, it's one or the other. They've changed from the manganese to the aluminium, but
It varies on supplier of the week, right? I think they've got multiple contracts to supply these batteries with LG and Panasonic and BYD, and so it does vary a bit, but fundamentally they work the same, they perform the same, and once it's in the car, you don't care.
So for all intents and purposes, you can consider those two interchangeable. They don't mix and match, but you don't necessarily get a guarantee of which one you'll get because they are quite equivalent. Say again?
And it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, right.
You got a nickel-based battery or you've got an iron-based battery, and you get those two different characteristics. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. All right, now this hopefully will answer your question from before around charge levels. When people say you have to charge a battery to know more than this, that's meaningless without knowing what type of battery they're talking about.
Yeah.
Those two examples we gave have different requirements and behave very differently. So the current rear-wheel drive LFP battery, it wants to be taken up to 100% every week. It does some internal battery maintenance, so it's safe taking to 100%, and when it gets there, it's like the old lead acids where you put them on trickle charger. It'll actually make sure everything's level and maintained. It will do some internal maintenance, and the Tesla manual says up to 100% charge once a week is ideal, so that it can do that maintenance. That actually means that the 60 kilowatt hours in that battery pack, you get to use 60 kilowatt hours of that battery pack on a regular basis, should you need to. In the nickel-based batteries, however, depending on where you read it, 80 to 90% is the max. The last time I read the Tesla manual, 80% was their recommended daily use maximum.
90 now, like the sliders is happy anywhere between 50 and 80, or 50 and 90.
So, read the manual, they'll update as they get more stats on their batteries. They do actually proactively monitor these cars to give you the best information. But you don't want to take it above about 80 or 90% routinely, and you don't want to take it below 20% routinely. Every time you do, it wears the battery just a little. So for an occasional long trip, if you need to charge the battery to full and take it down to 10% to get to where you need to go, that's fine for one trip. It's not a big deal at all. But if you're doing it every day for commuting, you prematurely wear the battery. So 80 to 20 is sort of the rule of thumb. Whatever the manual says, when you pick up the car, give it a double check. Set your daily charge limit to within the range that has been recommended in that car. Does that make enough sense to everyone?
Yeah. You sometimes, like a stupid fun thing. So you go 80% one week, 90% the next week. Does it matter? You've got to play around and just use the battery on the phone. So
get in and drive it. And really, if there's one lesson we want you to take away from the entire day, is get in and drive it. If you don't charge an LFP battery to 100% for a few days running, the car will tell you to do it. If you charge to 100% a NCA battery more than 3 days in a row, the car will pop up and tell you that you probably shouldn't. So it's fine. Don't sweat it. The car will let you know what's going on, and just read what it says and do what it says, and life's peachy. And
so the take home is set it appropriately. So on mine, it's left at 100% as was recommended.
If you've got so you look, and the way you can tell which sort of battery you've got and how you should treat it. If you go to the charging screen in the car, there's your little slider thing here, and as you slide it, mine has little notches at 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, and to get it past 100, it's sort of, it doesn't say it on the app, but in the car, it will tell you that that's trip. So it describes that anything above 90 as trip, which means you should only do it when you're going on a special trip and you need that extra capacity. Whereas all the rear-wheel drive cars, you just put that slider wherever you want, it doesn't matter. If you leave it too low for more than a week or two, the car will remind you that you should leave it set on 100.
So if it discourages you from going to 100, don't regularly. If it's fine, it's fine. And the car has, again, those bounds where if you're really doing it wrong, it will just politely suggest what you should be doing better. Does that answer?
So I keep mine charged all the time. It gets down to about 65-70%. I charge it overnight, 2 or 3 times a week. Is that harmful to the battery?
So mine's the rear-wheel drive, the LFP battery.
Yes, mine too, 2021 model.
Same actually, and I leave it set on 100% all the time. I plug it in every night, and it spends half of its life at 100%. Totally fine.
So on the NCA,
Yep.
is there a limit on the length of time that you can hold them at 100%? So you're going on a trip, but it might not be.
That's
more.
The more time it spends outside of that recommended range, the more time it spends slowly degrading the battery. So your ideal is to, if you leave it sitting at 80 or 90 the night before, tell it to be ready at 6 a.m. and it'll pop it up to 100% ready for you to go. You start driving, and within an hour you're back down below that number. It's spent at most 6, 8, 10 hours at that limit.
You'll talk about scheduling, right? You talk about scheduling.
Yeah, so we'll see it on the screen later. Yeah, so how you do that, Luke will show you later in the
We'll talk
interior
about
part.
scheduling later on.
So how do we charge? Someone mentioned before they're not coming with the UMCs anymore. That's in America on 110 volts because they have less power available. People just weren't using them. They were putting in the wall charger, and this thing was, it would take 40, 50 hours to charge the car. In Australia, they are continuing to bundle them. That was confirmed because we have 240 volts and 15 amp plugs are relatively easy to get a hold of.
In a land before time, long ago, Model 3s used to come with a wall connector and a mobile connector in Australia. Quite uniquely, globally, Australia got both in the boot. They don't include the wall connector anymore. You have to buy the wall connector separately.
Yeah, if anyone buys Model 3, if it's second hand and they don't put this in, then ask them where the bloody hell it is. But this charger here, there's one end that goes into the car, and then you'll get these 2 little tails that just plug in. One of them's for a regular 10 amp power point, plug your vacuum or your kettle into. The other one's for a 15 amp that if you've got a welder or any other reason to have a bit more power in your garage, this is what I've got. Charges 50% quicker. It's great.
Just a question about the 15 amp. I originally had a 15 12, and then I went to a police report of 15, but it won't actually charge at 15 amps, it only charges at 12 amps.
There's a lot of weird around that, and for most of them, it's just a matter of leaving it plugged in for a couple of days. When a car is full and the car does its occasional maintenance, it will see that the charger has the old software on it, update the software on the charger to give it the higher cap. But that's talking about new ones. There are some older models that behave differently.
Apparently there are some new cars being delivered with the 8 and 12 amp tails as well. You'll be able to tell if yours can upgrade or not. If there's in really fine print in between the pins, it'll say at 10 amps or 8 amps. If yours says, it'll only ever do what's written on the label.
Yeah, the mine's originally it was 1512, but I managed to get hold of the 1550.
Yeah.
But I've never taken it up to 100%. I need to leave it charging up to 100 to get the
Yeah,
software.
it sort of needs to, you don't need to go to 100%, you can just turn the slider down in the car and let it hit that limit and then leave it resting for half an hour after it's finished charging, and it will do the firmware update.
Okay, so if I sort of set it to my normal limit of 90, just leave it for what?
Just let it sit. Yeah, let it go to sleep after it's finished charging, and it will do the firmware update.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that that happens and isn't actually described somewhere in the documents, or that they haven't been updated proactively or labelled more clearly. Very good question though, because mine did the same. I looked it up. People online said just ignore it for a day and it'll magically go up to 15. Sure enough, it literally did.
Yeah, I guess they try not to overcomplicate things. So if you just forget about it, at some point it'll do it, right? So don't worry about it.
Now, for these tails, we'll talk about it a bit more in a minute for longer trips, but these aren't the only two things you can plug in. Anything that puts 240 volt grid power into this, one phase or three, you can buy a tail for it from someone. These are the two you get from the factory though. These are the two power points that are commonly found in homes. Anything else is optional because you're unlikely to have it in your home unless you've put it in specifically for an EV or you are a very serious welder. So that's option one for charging. Comes with the car, comes in a nice little bag, fits perfectly in the front with plenty of room to spare. It's lovely. You can see I've recycled a picture from before because just I thought it was nicely indicative of how you would actually use one. So your second broad option for charging, this is still AC, so this is still limited to that 11 kilowatts that your onboard charger can do, but it's a wall connector. Wall connector gets wired into some more serious copper. You can put some more power into it. If you're like me, you've only got pretty normal power at your house. I can get one of these put in, and I can charge my car at up to 7.2 kilowatts. Significantly quicker than the.
Is it just single phase? You got it on single phase?
Correct.
Because my electrician, when he installed it, he couldn't get it out of 5 because you could only put a 20 amp thing.
So the Queensland wiring rules say that what they call an uncontrolled circuit. And when they're talking about control, they're talking about their control, so the grid operator. If you've got a circuit where they don't have control, whether it's minute to minute, whether it's turned on or off, is limited to 20 amps. And that's not just cars, that's boilers, kettles, welders, whatever.
Water systems. If they're on.
Yeah, so anything that's hardwired. So what you can do is you can get more if you let the grid operator control it. And this is coming, I've got a Origin controlled charger at home and it will run at the full 32 amps, but Origin turn that off during peak.
Okay.
I can pay extra and I can open the Origin app and say, I really need to charge now.